Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Since this is my first official video, I am going to do a little bit of explaining first what I'm hoping to do with this channel. I'm going to look at good runs of old books. I might look at some new books after a while, but I'm going to start off with some good runs of old books, and I'm going to talk about things that most other people don't seem to talk about. Things about what makes a hero a hero, what makes a good story a good story. And partly I'm going to do this so that those people who have never read these old books, because they'll be from the late 70s, mostly from the 80s, and some from the 90s, that if you've missed these books and don't know they're out there, you should go and track down a copy of them. Most of the stuff that I'm going to talk about is going to be fairly cheap. You know, you could go to your back stock section of your comic store and get a copy for $10, $15, stuff like that. It's a little bit of money, but it's worth it, especially if you're a collector. And it's going to be worth it because I'm going to talk about good books and the way that comics should be. And that's the way that comics should be today, but they're not. So go to your back section and read good comics if that's all you have. So today I have in front of me X-Men number 268, which is an X-Men book, but it's a bit of an odd X-Men book because the X-Men did this thing back in the 90s and 80s where they would focus on the team. Mostly they would focus on the team, but every once in a while they'd have a small side issue where they would do one person, two people. This is the way that Marvel structured their books initially, and this is the way it should have been and should still be. This is the way it works because you're dealing with heroes. And when you have an individual in a book, like you got Captain America and you have Thor, and they're in their own book, you concentrate on that one hero. That's the way the book is structured. But when you have a team book like X-Men, you have a book where you focus on the team as the hero. It's like a unit, a military unit. You have no hero that's supposed to stand out in the team. The team is the hero. The team is what you concentrate on. And there's a whole bunch of different ways in which you can do that, in which they did that in books like the X-Men. You can focus on them like they were a military team. You can focus on them like they were a family. Some books focus on one or the other of these things much more. If you look at Fantastic Four, they're much more a family. If you look at X-Men, they're a family at times, but at times they're a military unit almost. But the point being that the hero in those stories is the team itself. But in these side books, like number 268, where you have one or two X-Men as the hero, again, it's a little bit in between. It's not focused on the individual. It's not focusing on the team itself, but it's focusing on, in this instance, Wolverine. Wolverine had his own series by this time, but still, they were doing a lot of standalone Wolverines in X-Men as well. But there is a lot of side characters in this, and even more than side characters. I would say that this type of story is more like a buddy cop movie story. Again, not focusing on an individual, not focusing on a team, but focusing on, in this instance, would be the friendship of these people. And this book, it takes place in two different time periods. One is 1944, and the other is the then present day, which would be 1990. And when I talk about these books, by the way, I'm not going to go over the entire story because I don't think there's any point in that, to review the entire thing, because if you read the book, you already know the story. If you haven't read the book, I don't want to ruin the story for you. The whole point is to talk about these good books, to get people to read them again, to get people to read them for the first time, so that they can know what good comics look like and enjoy comics if you don't enjoy them as they're coming out today. So in the 1944 section of this book, and it flips back and forth, you have Captain America, who is obviously the good cop in this story, and you have Wolverine, who is obviously the bad cop in this story. And that's the backstory to what is happening in the present day, which is 1990, where you have Black Widow, who is the good cop, and you have, again, Wolverine, who is the bad cop. And The reason why I compare this to a buddy cop movie, which, the 80s and 90s were great for making, it also has a bunch of other tells to show you that it's like a buddy cop movie, because you have your sidekick, your comic relief, which is Jubilee in this case. You have also something which sticks out when you have a buddy cop movie, or when you have something that's focusing on the friendship of these heroes, and it's the fact that you have a bad guy, but you don't really have the bad guy as a main character. He's there, he's part of the story, he's there to help drive the story along, but you're not going to remember him as much as you would if you're reading a standalone book. What I like to think about, the difference would be, think about the first Die Hard. You could probably tell me a lot about the villain in that movie. You'd probably tell me at the very least something about him. He's memorable because he's the second part of the story. He is what the hero is up against. But if I said, tell me about the bad guy in Lethal Weapon 1, you probably couldn't even give me his name, describe him for me. A little bit forgettable, because the focus is not on the bad guy. The focus is not on the antagonism between the good guy and the bad guy. The focus is on the buddy cop relationship, the friendship of these two people. You also have Psylocke in this, which you could see as being a little bit of a romantic interest, but not really. Psylocke is in this book mostly to tie it into the main storyline of X-Men, because at this time Psylocke has just become what most people think of Psylocke as today. Before that, she was something completely different. She was a very prim and proper, girlish English young lady. That's what she was before this. And she got transformed into what we know as Psylocke today by the Hand. As an assassin, she was supposed to be an assassin for them, and no one trusted her. So that's just a sidebar. That's why I say she's in this story itself, 268. But again, none of this story is wasted. This is good storytelling. It's written by Chris Claremont, who of course is the master storyteller for X-Men. He wrote all of the good stories that everyone is using now for X-Men stories. And this book is a very good example of, if you want examples of Captain America and Black Widow and Wolverine from the MCU, from the movie universe, this is an example of those characters to the T. This is where those stories come from. This is the well-written marvel that they're drawing on. So, to give you a little backstory and to give you a little bit of what the story is about, so that you're not left hanging about whether or not you want to read this, the story basically revolves around Black Widow, because in 1944, she was just a little girl in the story that they're telling in 1944 with Captain America and with Wolverine. She originally, I don't know if she is anymore, but originally Natasha, the Black Widow, she was the last surviving member of the Romanov family, which was the Russian royal family, and they were all executed. All of her family were executed by the communists when they took over, and she was the last surviving member, and everyone was trying to kill her. So in this story, Captain America and Wolverine sort of stumble upon each other, while the Hand has been employed to try to assassinate Natasha as she was a little girl, or change her into a assassin as part of the Hand. And they're there to defend her, and that story continues on into the future, where again Black Widow is trying, or the Hand is trying to assassinate Black Widow. So, as I said before, the story is about, I'd say, the friendship between these two different time periods, where one is Captain America and Wolverine, the other is Black Widow and Wolverine. And the reason why this works, and the reason why it doesn't really come out today is because there was this really simple idea understood in, the 1990s, 1980s, in that people can be complementary, in the fact that you can have two people who think differently, who have different ideas, who do things radically differently, but they can both still be heroes and they can both work together. They don't have to butt heads. They can complement each other. They can make up for what the other is lacking. And not only does this happen in the story of Wolverine and Captain America, where you would normally think that those two wouldn't get along, but they do get along in this story. And in the future story, again, you had this, what people would not even think of putting in a comic today, a complementary association between a man and woman, Black Widow and Wolverine, because, it was just understood that people can be complementary, and women and men are equal but different, and those differences can be made up by the other person, can be filled up by the other person. They don't have to have one people browbeating the other or literally beating the other. You can have a focus on friendship where one person, male and male or male and female, and it's just a friendship, and they can make up for the other person's faults by being complementary. That's the way a good story is told. That's the way this story is told in both the time periods that it's told in, because everybody needs to have their own individual voice. As a writer, I know this, and it has to be there if you want a good story. You need everybody to have their own individual voice. If everybody has the same voice, if you're assuming that everybody has to be the same, you don't have a good story. It's just monotonous. But this story isn't monotonous. So, it's a really good example of what made X-Men great. And you're looking at the art as I'm talking, and believe it or not, this is Jim Lee. Now, Jim Lee was extremely good in his early days. After a little while, he got into what everybody makes fun of, especially for Captain America and for X-Men. But in these earlier books, this is his glory days. This is when Jim Lee was the guy you wanted on your book. So it's beautiful art as well. So I suggest, if you haven't read this book, to go and pick up a copy, read it. You'll probably want to read more X-Men from reading this book, because it ties in so well to the other X-Men books. And this would be at a time when you didn't have to buy every other copy, every other kind of X book out there to understand the story. You just had to buy the X-Men books, because Wolverine books had their own story going on, and there was maybe a little reference here and there, but not a crossover in story, so that you had to buy multiple titles in order to follow the story. You might have to buy more than this book if you want to continue on with the story, because it ends on not really a cliffhanger, but a lead into the story. So you want a good book, you want a good X-Men book, or you want a good Marvel book, you just want a good comic, go track down something like this. Go track down X-Men number 268. You won't be disappointed. And if you find a nice copy of it in your backstock section of your comic store, which I would suggest you do that above going to Comixology or buying any kind of reprint, put it in your collection, because this is something that you should have in your collection. This is a great book. So that's about all I have to say for today. Hopefully I'm going to get a little better at this, and maybe have a little shorter videos next time. But until then, if you've liked anything that I've talked about, hit like, hit subscribe, and let me know that you're out there. Let me know that you're listening. And until then, until I see you again in the next video, I just want to say, make comics better by reading better comics, and this is a better comic. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.